What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the CrewCabDart YouTube channel. My name is Justin, and today we're going to be finishing up our Aces Royal Flush EFI install. In the last video, we went over a short list of things to check before installing a fuel injection system in your vehicle. Then we installed our new fuel tank, our Aces Slim Fit fuel pump, and our new 3/8 feed and return lines. Finally, we topped it off with our 1000 CFM throttle body, we mounted our billet fuel pressure regulator, and we tied it all together with our PTFE fuel lines. In this video, we're going to be installing the remainder of our Royal Flush EFI system. We'll be routing our wiring harness, we'll mount our ECU, we're going to be installing our necessary sensors such as our temperature sensor and our wideband oxygen sensor. We're going to be locking out our BlackJack Pro distributor and installing the rest of our ignition system, and we're going to find a new home for our handheld touchscreen tablet. Before we get started, let's take a closer look at our wiring harness. Aces has made their harness super simple. Everything is plug and play with the exception of these 4 wires here. Here we have our main harness power and ground. These will be going directly to our battery terminals, nowhere else whatsoever. The smaller red wire is our ignition source. We'll be hooking this to our keyed 12-volt ignition. And then our orange wire is our fuel pump power wire. They already have it relayed for us in the harness, so this will be going directly to our fuel pump power stud. So now that we know where our 4 loose wires go, let's start at one end of the harness and work our way to the other. The first thing we have here is our ECU connectors. You can't mess them up. They only go in one way and they click right in place. Next, we have our 2 fuses that will correspond with our 2 relays here. First, we have our fuel pump relay. Next is our main harness relay. Moving down the line, we have our additional wires connector that plugs into this sub-harness that has a bunch of extra inputs and outputs like radiator fan control, AC input, nitrous control. You may or may not use a lot of these in your build, so we'll talk about those later in the video. Next up, we have our CAN connector here. This is where we'll plug our handheld into. We'll run through our setup wizard. We can view any sensor data. We can make all the fine-tuning adjustments we need right off of this. However, if you prefer tuning with a laptop, Aces has you covered there as well. You can plug this right into your laptop. Using Aces advanced tuning software, you can make any adjustments you need directly from your laptop to the system. Moving on around, we have our VR connector. This is where we'll plug our distributor into. And then we have our coil connector. This is what we'll plug our ignition coil into. Here I have my fuel pressure sensor connector. In my particular kit, I do have an Aces fuel pressure sensor right on my regulator. With this, I can plug it in and read my fuel pressure directly on my handheld. Here we have our throttle body connector. This will plug directly into the side of our throttle body. It'll work our idle air control valve as well as our 100-pound injectors. It'll also read data from our throttle position sensor and our 3-bar map sensor. Last but not least, we have our 2 connectors for the sensors that we're going to be installing on our engine. Here we have our coolant temperature sensor connector, and we have our wideband oxygen sensor connector. Hopefully now you have a better understanding of how all our components work with our wiring harness. Now there's nothing left but to install it in the car. God, I'm ready to hear this thing run. To get the harness laid out, we need a good idea of where to locate all of our components. While I was building my car, I wanted to keep my engine bay really clean, and so I drilled a hole in the firewall behind my distributor cap to run all my wires through. The existing hole that I've already just drilled in the firewall is the perfect location to run my Aces harness through to keep everything really nice and tidy in the engine bay. So let's jump into it and start feeding this harness through. Okay. So we have everything hooked up in the engine bay that we can for the moment. We still have to add our distributor and our wideband oxygen sensor, but we'll get to that a little bit later. For now, let's hop inside the car and see what we have going on in there. We got a mess in here. We're 2 weeks to mow party, and this is nowhere near good.
No, it isn't.
It's rough. It's rough. I know it's going to be kind of hard to see some of this stuff, but on this side of the firewall, we have our coil connector way up front, we have our handheld plug-in, our additional wires connector, our ECU connectors, and our 4 main wires that we got to hook up ourselves. When the interior was all together, I actually mocked up my ECU already, and it fits really, really nicely in the end of my center console. Once I get the interior back in, it'll tuck away really nice. You'll never even see it's there. In order to keep my engine bay as clean as possible, I opted to put my coil on this side of the firewall. I'm going to mount it up under the dash, nice and neat where no one will ever see it. We're going to be able to plug it in, and we're going to be good to go. This old rig has the battery mounted back in the trunk because race car. With that being said, 3 of the 4 wires we have to wire in ourselves aren't quite long enough to make it all the way back there. The 3 wires I have to run to the back are my main positive, my main negative, and my fuel pump. So I've installed some extension wires to get us back there. Anytime you're running extension wires, you want to be sure that you're using the proper gauge. In this case, we're running 10 gauge for both our fuel pump and both of our battery connections. The last wire we're going to need to hook up is our keyed ignition wire. Lucky for us, we can find one of those right up here under the dash. My head hurts, my back hurts, and I can't feel my leg. But if you want to be like me and install Aces on your vehicle, check out AcesEFI.com and be sure to use my code DARTCREW10 for an extra 10% off your order. Well, now that we have all the wiring finished up on the inside of the car, I went ahead and threw the interior back together. Now all that's left is to go up and install our oxygen sensor. Look, I'm not a good welder, okay? My whole goal is to make this not leak. So I don't want to hear anything in the comments about my trashy welds. Just let me be. The wideband oxygen sensor is an extremely crucial sensor to any EFI system. It's going to measure the amount of unburned fuel in the exhaust and relay that information up to the ECM. With that information, the ECM is going to make all necessary adjustments so we can achieve our target air-fuel ratio. Placement of the oxygen sensor is extremely crucial when it comes to reading air-fuel ratios. Aces suggests 6 to 10 inches from the collector on your header. However, that puts me in a really bad spot down here. So I'm going to go approximately 8 inches from where all of the pipes converge on my header here. That's going to lead me right in this area here. Aces has provided a weld-in bung for our oxygen sensor. So to get the show on the road, I need to make a mark, drill my hole, and weld in the bung. We'll be good to go. We're going to be slightly picky when it comes to installing these oxygen sensors, so we don't want it parallel or less than parallel. You always want it angled upward slightly to prevent any moisture from collecting in it, and you want it angled slightly towards the back of the exhaust. We actually have a sacrificial oxygen sensor threaded into the bung here. That's just going to keep the bung from warping when we go welding it in place. We got our bung welded in. Let's bring the camera in and take a closer look at it. So, yeah, it's not my best work, but it'll do. It'll do just fine. All right, guys, we're running out of parts to install. All we have left now is our BlackJack Pro distributor. This distributor works like any other distributor out there. It does have mechanical advance built into it. However, in our application, we're going to be letting the computer control our ignition timing, so we need to lock this thing out. Let me show you how to do that. To lock out your distributor, we're going to need a couple of tools. First, we're going to need a Phillips head screwdriver. Next up, we're going to need a small punch. Following up the punch, we need a hammer. Finally, we need some needle nose pliers. First things first, we need to pull our cap and our rotor off. Long screws. Now that we have our cap and rotor removed, we've exposed our mechanical weights and springs. Let me bring you in a little closer and show you what we have going on here. Here we have our mechanical springs and weights. As the distributor spins, the centrifugal force is going to pull these weights out and advance our timing. In our application, we don't want that whatsoever. So we're going to be removing these springs and weights. To do that, we pop these springs off just like so. With the springs off, we just remove our weights. This movement here is our mechanical advance. It can be adjusted by changing this bushing here. In our case, we don't want any whatsoever, so we're going to be taking our needle nose pliers and removing that nut off the bottom side. If you can't get this nut loose with the pliers, you can take a 7mm wrench and loosen it. Most of the time they pop loose with pliers though. So now we're just going to twist it right off. Our next step is going to be punch out this roll pin. This is where a block of wood comes in handy. So now we're going to take our small punch and punch right into this roll pin here. Now with our roll pin removed, we can slide this entire shaft straight up. And if you see, there's a blue bushing right here that we need to remove. We take our bushing out, and if you look here, there's a large hole and there's a small hole on our distributor shaft. We're going to take this pin here and we're going to insert it into the small hole. And like that, we have no more mechanical advance. So next up, we need to drive our roll pin back in place. With our roll pin back installed, we have completely taken all of the mechanical advance out of our distributor. Now we're ready to throw our rotor and our cap back on. We'll be in good shape. On the bottom side of our rotor, you'll notice there's a square peg and a round peg that will correspond with a square hole and a round hole on our distributor shaft. Be sure those are lined up, pop them in place, and you're ready to install the screws. Now we're ready to install our distributor cap. Now our BlackJack Pro distributor is mechanically locked out and is ready to play nice with our Royal Flush ECU. It's ready to be installed in the car, but it's getting pretty late, so I think I'm going to catch up with you guys tomorrow morning. All right guys, it's the next morning. I've had my cup of coffee and I'm ready to finish up this install. As you saw last night, we got our distributor locked out. Now all we really got to do is set the engine to top dead center and stab it in place. we're really not far from hearing this thing run. Alright, so we just got our engine set on top dead center. We dropped our distributor in and we have all our plug wires stuck on there. Now we're ready to hook the battery cables up and power up the system. But before we ever turn the key, we really need to purge our fuel lines. As you guys saw in my last video, I made all these fuel lines from scratch, and there's very likely that there's some contaminants left in those lines, even though I blew them out. So I'm going to take my inlet off of the EFI throttle body. I'm going to run it into a gas jug and purge the line a time or two. Ooh, I tell you what, I could already see the smoky burnouts. So the reason we're doing what we're doing here is so that none of those contaminants that I mentioned earlier get into these little small holes in the fuel injectors and stop them up. So I'm going to take my inlet off, put my line right over into a gas jug. We'll let the pump run a time or two and make sure we flush all the contaminants out. Turn the key. Yep. We're getting some fuel now. Yeah, we had a speck or two in there. Good thing we did that. All right, so now we have our fuel lines purged. Now let's turn the key on and go through the startup wizard. So the first thing it's going to ask us is what system we're running. In our case, we're running the Royal Flush system. So we'll hit Don't Show This Again, double tap on Royal Flush. Now we'll go to our top right corner, and we'll go to Wizards, Start Wizard. And I do have a mild cam in this car, but it's recommended that you start with a stock cam application and tune off of that. We're going to select stock cam. And being as we're running the Royal Flush system, it's already preset to only one wideband oxygen sensor, so we'll just hit next again. And then I'm running the BlackJack Pro distributor, so we're going to be running a magnetic distributor. We're going to be just hitting next on the 150 millijoule for spark energy. We only have 4 injectors in our throttle body, so we'll hit next again. It's preset to the 100.53 pound per hour injectors that we have, so we won't mess with it. We'll hit next. I have a 360. It's already typed in there, so I've got 360. And then my hot idle RPM, we'll go 850. All right, now it's just going to get us to double check our settings. All look good to me. So we'll save our settings. Now we'll turn the key off. So now we'll key it back on after configuring everything. And we are ready to fire it up and set our initial timing and our fuel pressure. Test fire number 1. All right, now that we have our fuel pressure set to spec, which is about 45, we need to set our ignition timing, but before we get out there and put a timing light on it, we need to lock it out in the handheld. So let me bring you in and show you how to do that. All right, so what we're gonna wanna do is we're gonna hit the 4 dots in the top right corner. We'll go to Tuning, Spark, Advanced, and then it says Lock Ignition Timing, Unlocked. They will come unlocked. Double tick on it. We'll hit Lock, Save. That's going to lock our ignition from trying to adjust anything. So now we can go out in the engine bay and set a timing light on it and get the engine stuck on 15 degrees before top dead center. Good. Now that we have our fuel pressure set to spec and our ignition timing set to 15 degrees before top dead center, we'll go back in the handheld and unlock the timing and let the computer take over. And then we're just going to let it sit here, get up to operating temperature, and run for about 30 minutes before we take it on our first ride. So we've had a little time to drive it around. They say you're supposed to go easy on it for, 30 minutes or somewhere around there. Just take your time, let the system learn. But I kind of went straight into beating on it, and I gotta say it took it really well. I'm actually very impressed with how this thing's running. All we did was go through the wizard. I've made no other adjustments, and it has run really well. Air-fuel ratios have been looking good. The timing, everything has been really good. The car's running well, starts well. Now, I won't say that it's perfect because, it'll learn over time. It'll get better as we go. And who knows, I may have to tap in with a computer and make some adjustments after a while, but I'm not going to do that until I give it an adequate amount of time to learn. First impressions, solid. Genuinely solid. The installation was really easy, and it's essentially been turnkey ever since getting the installation finished up. I I'm not gonna lie, it's running a little better. Pretty good deal better than it did with the carburetor. And we had the carburetor dialed in really good. And this thing it's taking it. Let me see how much damage we can do here. It is doing A-OK. AFRs was like 12.5 to 1, that whole pull. It's running really good. I couldn't be happier with this. Now, you know, like I said, I will say it needs to learn a little more. It's kind of going lean when I let off. It's going lean on decel, but I can go in and tune that out if it doesn't do it itself. I've really probably got, I don't know, 20-25 miles on the sit-up so far. And so I'm thinking next chance I get, I'm gonna top it off with fuel. And I'm gonna drive it right and let it do its learning. And I'm kind of anxious to compare fuel economy as well. Because with the carburetor, I got a best of 18 miles to the gallon on power torque. And so I'm kind of anxious to see what kind of improvements we may be seeing here with the fuel injection. So as some of you know, it's a 360 Magnum, a T56 6-speed transmission, and I have an A-body 8 3/4 in the rear with 430 gears. Nothing about that combination screams fuel economy, but it's done surprisingly well. So I'm really thinking that once this fuel injection gets dialed in, we stand a really good chance of potentially breaking into the 20s, which is very exciting. So I'm kind of anxious, you know, on the trip out to Low Party to see how it's going to do, see if we do break into the 20s. But overall, the system, honestly, really good. I hope maybe if any of you guys were on the fence about checking out Aces stuff, maybe this video helped you kind of make your mind up. And if you want to try it out, you know, be sure to visit AcesEFI.com and use my code DartCrew10 for an extra 10% off your order. Well, I'm going to continue cruising on this thing. I'm going to fill it up with fuel, put some miles on it, let the system learn. Try not to break it before our next trip. I do plan on filming that trip, so look forward to that video. And hey, I appreciate all the support on the last video. We really tried to make it a good production, and it takes a pretty good amount of effort. And so I really appreciate all the positive feedback from that video. And hey, I appreciate everybody watching this video, last video. I appreciate all the support. If you don't mind, I'd really appreciate you to subscribe. You know, leave a like, leave a comment down below. Let me know what you think. Ask me any questions you have. I'll do my best to answer them. I really appreciate everybody for watching. I hope to see some of you at Low Party here in a couple of weeks. You can come check this stuff out in person for yourself. I think that's going to be all for now. See you in the next one.